This week on The Perfect Scam.
It felt like I was not even inside my body at the time. While it was going on, I got into fight or flight, and I was doing everything that they asked me to do because I figured any wrong move or anything that I said could have just sent them, to want to hurt her.
Welcome back to The Perfect Scam. I'm your host, Bob Sullivan. One of the oldest problems in technology is, how do you prove you are who you say you are? How do you convince a website, or a bank, or a doctor's office that you are really you? Authentication is the fancy name for this, but it can also be called the right human problem. As in, are you the right human to ask for this cash withdrawal or this data? Well, one of the oldest problems in tech is now running right into one of the newest, what some people now call the real human problem. As in, does this request come from a real person, or is it a computer creation, a synthetic identity, a fake voice or video? Solving both the right person and the real person problems might sound a bit esoteric, but now that computers are pretty good at pretending to be real people, well, the impact can be quite terrifying. So we begin today's story with Amanda Murphy, a veteran and a mom who was convinced recently that she was talking on the phone with the right person, her daughter, who found herself in a very wrong situation. How long have you lived in Bryan, Texas?
About 9 years now.
Where'd you move from?
From Southern California.
That's a big change.
It was a big change, yeah.
How do you like Texas?
I like it. I love the people. The weather, not so much, but everything else has been great.
It's hot, right?
Yeah, it's very hot, yeah.
And it's hot deep into the year, too.
Yeah, we have about 3 weeks of winter, and that's about it.
Oh, my God. Wow. I mean, talk to me in January, and I'll be jealous. So.
Yeah.
Amanda is happy to be in Texas, but she's far from her extended family, which means she's extra protective of the loved ones she has nearby. That includes her 18-month-old baby and her teenage daughter, who works at a fast food restaurant nearby and goes to school. Our story really begins in August, when her older daughter tells Amanda she has to leave a little early for work the next morning.
Well, the night before, my daughter said that she wanted to get some school supplies, and that day she had work at 11 o'clock.
So off to Walmart her daughter goes, a few minutes before 11 o'clock. And almost immediately, the baby starts crying. She needs a new diaper. And, it's always like this. Halfway through the change, the phone rings.
I was in the living room with my toddler. And
of course. Things always happen when you're changing.
Yeah, and I was just kind of like a little frantic to begin with. And then I answered the phone, and everything got real very fast.
Amanda answers the phone with one hand while dealing with a fussy baby in the other hand. And then, she gets the shock of a lifetime.
That's when I heard my daughter's voice on the phone, screaming and crying for help. I had gotten a phone call from a local number, but I didn't recognize it. So I went ahead and answered it, and it was my daughter on the line, and she was frantic and very worked up, asking me to come help her, come get her. She said, "Mom, please come help me, please come get me, come find me," which I thought was really weird. But it was basically a bunch of crying and saying that over and over again.
Yeah, and I'm guessing it wasn't in that tone of voice you just used, right?
No, she was hysterical.
She said, "Mom, come find me, come help me."
Yeah.
And you probably even had trouble hearing what she was saying in between the cries, right?
Right, yeah. But I knew for sure it was her voice. That was absolutely her voice. I had no doubt in my mind. Thought maybe she got in a fender bender and she was disoriented or in shock, or she thought she was going to get in trouble. And I told her, it's okay, calm down, tell me where you are, what's going on. And then that's when a man came on the phone and asked if I was her mother.
Amanda doesn't recognize the man's voice at all.
And then I just assumed when the man came on the phone that it was because she was frantic and hectic and somebody was just trying to get a hold of the other person on the line, trying to calm the situation down. So I assumed it was the other person that she had gotten in an accident with.
But there is no car accident. Instead, this stranger has a very chilling message for Amanda?
Almost immediately, his demeanor changed from calm and indifferent to very serious and very, I guess, calm. It was this weird calm, like he was the domineering one in the conversation. And he had told me, hey, I need you to do exactly what I'm telling you to do. And if you try to contact anybody while we're on the phone call, I will know about it. And then he proceeded to tell me that, like, he had my daughter, he had found her at Walmart, and that he was going to do bad things to her if I didn't do what he asked me to do.
Oh my God.
And that's putting it nicely. He went into detail. He went into detail about the things that he would do and what would happen to her if I didn't comply.
Oh my God.
Yeah, essentially that he was going to sell her and that he was a trafficker.
Oh God.
But he was saying in detail, like, this is what's going to happen to her if I sell her.
Oh
And
my God.
yeah, and it got very real for me very fast.
I can't imagine how fast your heart was beating.
Oh, it was beating out of my chest.
And you had just seen her minutes before.
Yes.
So he also basically knew that she was leaving the house.
Somehow, I mean, I don't see that being a coincidence.
So what does this stranger on the phone want Amanda to do?
He asked me to send him $3,000 and that he would meet me at Walmart with my daughter after I had sent him money.
He wanted you to go withdraw $3,000 in cash from somewhere?
That's what I initially thought. I told him, it's going to take me some time because I'd have to go to the bank. I'd have to, get the money. And then he said, well, we're going to do it in increments. And I need you to send it via money order by Walmart.
Oh, okay.
So he told me to drive to Walmart and go ahead and make these separate transactions. But I had my 1.5-year-old with me.
Oh, God. So Amanda finishes changing the baby, gets her dressed, throws her little girl into a car seat, and races off to Walmart to try to rescue her other daughter.
He had me narrate where I was and what I was doing the entire time. Like, I'm getting my daughter, I'm getting her dressed, I'm getting my stuff together, I'm trying to find my keys, I'm going to my car, I'm turning my car on, and so on. And then he told me to tell him where I was as I was driving. So I tell him the streets and I tell him what I could see on my left and my right. And he was responding to me as if he knew exactly where I was and he knew exactly what I was talking about. And then when I was coming into the Walmart parking lot, he acted as if, oh, I can see you driving into the parking lot. I can see your car. So at that point, I thought I was being watched. Well, I got to the parking lot and he told me to stop because he was going to give me directions. And he told me to write down a name and number and tell the Walmart employee that it was me sending money to my brother-in-law in Mexico. And he gave me an address and he gave me the name of the store that I was to send it to and the name of the person that I was supposed to send it to. And I written all that down on a notes app in my phone. And then that's when I headed into Walmart.
As she grabs the baby and heads into the store, Amanda's mind is swirling with dark thoughts. And this is the Walmart that you thought your daughter was at, right?
Yes.
Or at least where she had headed. You didn't know at this point if she had been taken somewhere else.
Right. So I thought she was being held at, I don't know, maybe somewhere in the parking lot, maybe at a different location or something.
And where's the baby?
I had her on my hip the whole time. I waited until there was a crowd or there was people walking into Walmart. So I wasn't alone in the parking lot while I was walking with my baby into the store.
Got it.
Because I was afraid if I'd gotten out with my baby, oh my God, are they going to try and
take the baby?
Yeah, something, or, confront me or something like that in the parking lot.
Yeah. So, baby on her hip, Amanda walks into the store and heads straight to the counter where she intends to start sending money to her daughter's kidnapper.
So I tried to make the transaction. I told the woman at the counter what it was for, who I needed to send it to. And then she asked me if I was okay. And he asked me to keep him on the phone the whole time. So he's on the phone in my pocket as I'm talking to the Walmart employee. And the woman's just asking me, are you okay? Like, are you sure you're okay? And I'm like, yeah, I just wanted to make this transaction for my brother in Mexico.
But on this day, Amanda encounters a Walmart employee who insists on asking questions. The right questions.
She could tell something was wrong, and she goes, I don't think that I want to continue with this transaction. And I said, I have to, or they're going to sell my daughter. And she said, who's going to sell your daughter? And I'm whispering this, so hopefully they don't hear me on the phone. And I said, the person on the phone. And she said, no, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like a scam.
That sounds like a scam? The words land hard on Amanda, who is convinced they might trigger a violent reaction from her daughter's captors. But the employee insists on getting a manager involved.
And I was like, I thought that, I was going to get found out, that they were watching me, and that I just blew it, and my daughter was going to be gone forever. At that moment, it was like the lowest low of the whole situation.
She says to you, it's a scam, and you think, my God, my daughter's dead, or something terrible.
Something like that, yeah. I'm thinking that, oh my God, she's going to try and get the manager, and she's going to try and rectify the situation that she thinks is a scam. And my daughter is going to be hurt because of it, is essentially what I was thinking.
But the manager comes over, and the manager has a plan.
So she goes and she gets the manager, and she says, is your daughter at home, or like, where would your daughter be if not for the situation? I said, at work. And she said, write your daughter's name down on this piece of paper. So I went ahead and wrote her name down, and they asked me where she worked, and I told them.
So the manager goes away quietly with a plan to call Amanda's daughter at work. And Amanda, well, she is beside herself. While the manager was off trying to call your daughter at work,
Yeah.
I mean, during that stretch of time, you think something horrible is going to happen, right?
It was probably the longest couple minutes of my life.
Wow.
I was just like hoping that they were going to get her on the phone and that it was fake. And I was just holding my breath.
She doesn't have to hold her breath very long. The manager soon comes back with a phone and puts it up to Amanda's ear. It's her daughter.
The first thing I heard from her was like, what is going on? And I just started crying, and I just broke down. I was just like, I thought that they took you. I thought I was never going to see you again. I thought you were going to be hurt. And she was just like, Mom, I don't even know what's even happening. She's like, I'm in the middle of work. I can't talk to you right now, but like, when I come home on my break, I'll talk to you. But it was just like the most emotional 1-minute phone call I've ever had with my child.
Now thinking about the unbelievable roller coaster of your stomach, even between thinking...
Oh yeah, and I just broke down in the middle of Walmart.
The alleged kidnapper is still on the phone with her, but now Amanda knows he's lying, that her daughter is fine. Did the person on the phone say anything?
They started to like yell and get really frantic, but I didn't give them a chance to speak. I just hung up the phone. I was just so relieved that the situation was fake that I didn't care to like listen to anything that they had to say. I didn't care to like say anything to them. I just wanted it to be done.
He didn't try to, one last crack at saying like, you better send me the money or else.
Yeah, I think that's what he was trying to do. I think he was trying to say, oh no, you need to send me the money, but I hung up on him.
The scene of the story is a bit chaotic, but also a bit heartwarming.
I was just outside of my body. It felt like I was not even inside my body at the time. While it was going on, I got into fight or flight, and I was doing everything that they asked me to do because I figured any wrong move or anything that I said could have just sent them, to want to hurt her or want to end the conversation and just sell her anyways. And I just, like I said, I was out of my body, and I couldn't even fathom the situation. While I have a baby on my hip, I'm going through these emotions. And the second that I heard her voice is when it's almost like I snapped back into my body, and I just broke down and I cried. And I had like strangers coming up to me at Walmart, like, "Are you okay?" And like praying for me and stuff.
Perfect strangers came up and saw that you were in distress and took care of you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's very beautiful, actually.
Yeah, it was actually, it was very nice to have that experience after something like that. To know that, you know, there were still good people in the world that, you know, wanted my, you know, my well-being, even though they didn't even know me after I just went through what I went through.
The whole experience lasts only about 45 minutes, but it feels like a lifetime of stress. I mean, and I know you're probably reliving some of those feelings now. And
yeah, it's a little
apologize.
distressful, but I just feel like it's so important that people know about this and
Yes.
you know, the ins and outs of it, because I would never wish this upon anybody. So I'm happy to share.
I mean, and it's so appreciated because, you know, the more we talk about this, the more somebody who might go through this might say, "Oh, I heard that podcast where that happened to that woman."
Oh no, I appreciate, you know, having the opportunity to tell my story and, you know, to warn other parents out there what's going on, because like, again, like I said, I would not wish this upon my worst enemy.
And just one other thing, because I feel like this is something we never talk enough about, and nobody who isn't in this situation doesn't appreciate. How much more complicated and emotional and exhausting is this whole experience when you've got a 1.5-year-old on your hip?
The thing about that is that I had like three choices. I had a choice to possibly bring her in the situation and try to save my oldest daughter, leave her at home, which obviously I could not do, or just not go, which I also could not do because I had to save my other daughter. So I felt like I was putting my 1.5-year-old in harm's way in some way, even though she was with me. I felt like I had no choice but to like bring her with me. So I had all this fear and all this trauma surrounding what was going on with my oldest daughter. And then I've got this whole other situation with my 1.5-year-old that's traumatic. Like I might be bringing her into a horrible situation. Like I might be bringing her into harm's way as well.
Yeah.
So I had little to no choice. And it was a horrible feeling to have to do that.
Just an impossible choice for a mom.
Yeah. And then they gave me a time limit as well. They gave me 10 minutes. So I had 10 minutes to like decide what I was going to do and do it with the baby on my hip.
Put the baby in the car seat, get the baby out of the car seat, all that, right?
Absolutely. Yep.
You haven't mentioned this yet, but I'm guessing odds are high. At some point, the baby started crying.
Yeah. I think that she could gather that I was feeling distressed and traumatized or something. So she in turn was like not in the greatest of moods, obviously.
Yeah.
And she was kind of crying a little bit when I was taking her out of the car seat. And I was just thinking, oh God, just like, please let this all go smoothly. I can't imagine, you know, having to stop what I'm doing to, you know, cater to my 1.5-year-old when my oldest daughter is in a dire situation. So,
and also just even having these kinds of conversations are so much more complicated, right? Because you only have one hand to
exactly
to sign things, and yeah.
Yep.
So now that Amanda understands everything that's happened, she heads home, trying to calm herself down, trying to calm her baby down. But a surprise visit helps with that.
So I got home about 20 minutes later. I tried to call the police and see if they could do anything about it, and they couldn't. So when I headed home after I tried to call the police, she had gotten home right after me. So it seems like they let her off considering the situation. And that was like the most relieved I've ever been in my life. When I like actually physically saw her in the house was the most relief I've ever felt, I think.
And you gave her a big hug.
Yes. Yeah. It was a very emotional moment.
But she came running home to make sure you were okay, right?
I think so. And she's almost 18. You know, she's not very, she's a lot more independent, you know? So I feel like that was a big thing for her to do. was to come home to make sure I was okay. And that's what I kind of felt like she was doing.
And very nice of her boss to let her go home too.
Oh yeah, very much so. I was so like worked up all day. Like I felt like I was on defense all day. There wasn't anything that really remedied that except time. I mean, even now that I talk about it, it's still very fresh and still feels alarming. But it's calmed down since then. There's been a little bit of time in between the incident and now.
But still, August is 3 months ago, and it still feels, I'm sure the adrenaline probably hasn't quite completely drained from your body yet.
No, it has not. Like anytime, because I'll have friends and family and they've seen what happened on the news. So they ask me about it, or they'll, some people will check in on me, and even just talking about it and bringing it up, it makes me feel like there's this knot in my stomach and my chest feels heavy. And it was one of the worst experiences I've ever had in my life.
In the end, thanks to these Walmart employees who interceded, you didn't send any money, right?
No.
The reason why I'm kind of dwelling on how you feel is because I don't want someone to think, oh, since, no money was stolen, nothing terrible happened. I think something really terrible happened, right?
It was traumatic. I still feel like crying about it sometimes.
You're an Army veteran, right?
Yes.
So it's not as if you've never been through difficult things in your life, right?
Yeah, I've been through a thing or two. And this was one of the most traumatic things that I've ever experienced, because that's my kid. It was so real to me because it was absolutely her voice on the phone. Like I know my daughter's voice, and it was her voice on the phone. And what gets me is that they were able to replicate that, and they were able to make it so real, and they knew exactly what to say and exactly where I was somehow. So it still bothers me that that's possible, that they were able to like infiltrate my family in that way. It feels so violating,
And you are convinced that someone used some kind of technology to mimic your daughter's voice?
Yes, because that was absolutely my daughter's voice on the phone. But I mean, obviously it wasn't, now that I know better. But at the time, there was no difference between that voice and my daughter's voice on the phone. It was hers.
I mean, they knew precisely when she was supposed to be at Walmart also, which makes it so much more believable to me.
Yes. It's absolutely wild to me that it was the exact same Walmart she was expected to be at. So that feels even violating to me in itself, because like that's not a coincidence to me. Like, how did they know that? It makes you feel like it's not over, because they had that access to you. They had that access to your family and your routine and, possibly your conversations on the phone or in your own home. And you don't know how they got all that. You don't know how they knew where to get me to send the money. I don't know how they got all that information.
The whole experience seems so real because Amanda is convinced that criminals used technology so they could sound just like her daughter and know where her daughter would be. We have no way to know what kind of tech was used in this crime. Was there a real human mimicking her daughter's voice, or a computer-generated voice? But we do know that voice cloning technology is available, is very inexpensive, and criminals are using it in all kinds of ways. Tech companies are in an arms race right now, trying to create software to foil these fakes. One such company on the front lines of this fight is Pindrop, which makes deepfake detection technology. The CEO of that company, Vijay Balasubramaniyan, is here to talk about what he's seeing on the front lines and how we can protect ourselves in a world where we can't even be sure a real person is on the other end of a telephone line.
That is really new. And so, for the longest time, the problem that we were focused at Pindrop is the right human problem. That is this really Bob, or is it Bob's kids or Bob's spouse or some random fraudster sitting in West Africa, right? Like you're trying to do the right human, and the right human problem is still very important. Now, because of the rise of generative AI, it's become a real human problem. So is this even a real human, or is this a machine trying to pretend to be Bob? And you have to solve both of those problems, but the real human problem has become way more important to solve as a first go around. because of the fact that generative AI has made it so simple for machines to pretend to be human. And they're doing this at crazy scale and with crazy accuracy.
One reason criminals are racing to use voice cloning technology is because it allows for real-time exchanges with potential victims, during which they can exert more time-based pressure than, say, a back and forth over email. Time pressure is almost always an element in scams.
But just imagine you are in an emergency situation where your doctor's calling you and saying, hey, your kid just came, he needs emergency procedure. I figured I'd call you and tell you because he doesn't want to make a decision. And I think I found a blood clot in his leg and I absolutely need to operate, but I can't operate with a deposit. Can you wire this money in? And you're going to say, oh, shucks, that's great. And he could make up all kinds of reasons, right? Because I didn't want him to further crater, I've put him under, so you can't speak to him. Or I've gotten him to just say these few words. He's really weak. And, he gave me the phone. Like, you can make this stuff up. And, when you are faced with an emergency, like, traditionally what used to happen is you used to get text messages where it was asynchronous, or you'd get emails that were asynchronous. Now, with calls and video chats and things like that, you can make it right here, right now, apply the pressure, make it an emergency situation.
It's important for us to tell you that this technology isn't science fiction. It's real, and it has been used in crimes. Vijay sees and hears about this every day.
That's the problem. These guys are heartless. Like, we've heard more calls. Over time, we've got 2.2 million fraud calls. So it's not a small set. We've heard them do all kinds of despicable things.
One high-profile use of deepfake voice cloning happened during primary season, when someone hired by a Democratic Party opponent of President Joe Biden in the primary paid for creation of a robocall that would dissuade people from bothering to vote in the New Hampshire primary.
So earlier this year, we were the ones who identified the first, case of election interference with President Biden's robocall. And so we're the ones who detected that robocall and said it was deepfake. But not only did we detect it was deepfake, we actually identified the AI application used to create that deepfake, and then got the AI application to shut down the person creating those deepfakes. And so when you actually listen to Biden it was just a minute, all of the sentences that Biden said in that particular deepfake were all generated, because there's just so much of President Biden out there that they essentially were able to say things like, hey, don't come to vote this Tuesday, save your vote for November.
And just to be clear, they could make me say something I have never said.
Absolutely. And that's what they're doing. They can absolutely make you say things that you never, ever said.
And they can make you do things you'd never do. In one situation, AI helped criminals steal $25 million from a corporation.
Yeah, the interesting story is there was this person in the finance organization who got an email saying, hey, I have this urgent transaction. As we've done before in urgent transactions, I can't tell you exactly why we need to do this transaction. It was with the engineering firm AARP, which built the Sydney Opera House. Said, do this transaction. And the funny thing is, the finance officer said, oh, you know what? This clearly sounds like a phishing email. I'm not even going to pay it a second attention. And, and then what ended up happening is, because that phishing email didn't get the attention, immediately it was followed by saying, if you don't believe this phishing email, get on the Zoom call. And so they got on the Zoom call. And once he got on the Zoom call, he was not only seeing the video and voice of his CFO, he was seeing two other senior execs on that particular call. And the CFO proceeded to go on. And what they're doing in this particular case is they're using a face swap technology and a voice cloning technology. And they're using that combination to essentially have this live video call. We see this a lot in romance scams where, they've essentially swapped their face with someone who looks like Ryan Gosling, or someone who looks like Tom Hanks, but they're using the same face swapping technology and the voice cloning technology. And he essentially got this finance guy to wire $25 million.
criminals are using AI to scale up their attacks too.
But the reason they're doing this is, I'll give you the story of one of the gangs that we catch. It's a gang out of West Africa, which we call West Africa One. It's headed by this guy called Williams. And until generative AI, he'd employ 12 to 15 people in his fraudulent call center, and they'd keep dialing for dollars. Now, more recently, what we've started seeing is he's reducing his employment and using these systems to essentially steal money. And what he's doing is he's combining these voice cloning system with what is known as a large language model. A large language model essentially gives you answers, just like Google gives you answers and ChatGPT and things like that. They give you answers to questions. He's getting the large language model to generate the script, and then he's getting the voice cloning software to change that script into voice. And that is actually having an interaction with the call center agent. So the call center agent doesn't realize they're not talking to a human, they're actually talking to a machine that's being fed by this large language model. And the crazy thing about these large language models is they usually hallucinate. So they make up a lot of stuff. But in this particular environment, when this fraudster is saying, make up anything in order to get the call center agent to give you details of the account and that you can take over the account, they're making all kinds of reasons. So they're saying, my daughter is sick right now. So they're coming up with all of these reasons in order to convince the call center agent that any information that they don't have is completely fine because of some particular situation. And so this fraudster is able to scale his attacks to all the accounts that he's compromised, to then go take over that account.
It's easy to see how generative AI might be used by criminals to fine-tune their scam stories. Cold calling bots will probably be better than human criminals pretty soon, Vijay thinks, in part because they hallucinate, which in the world of AI means make up random things. That can be an asset in the ever-evolving world of scams. So the limiting factor for a lot of these crimes were the skill of these call center employees who called up and pretended to be people who held accounts or whatnot, right?
Yes.
And some were better, some were worse.
Yes.
But I think what you're telling me is they're creating frontline call center attackers,
yeah,
who over time are probably better, certainly than your worst call center employees, and maybe as good as your best, right?
Yeah, so you have to train an army of fraudulent call center folks who are dialing for dollars. Imagine replacing that with bots who have no morals, right?
But the example that you're giving me is the thing that has concerned me the most, which is that these LLMs will learn very quickly precisely what story works best with a call center employee. Maybe saying, I lost my credit card doesn't work. Maybe saying, I'm in the ambulance with my wife, she's about to give birth, does work. Who knows? But whatever it is, they'll figure it out and become good at it very quickly. To me, that's the most realistic scenario for using this kind of technology and scams at scale.
And that's why they're using it, right? Like they're using it at scale because that's the advantage. And they can keep iterating, right? Like, they don't get tired. None of the issues are there, right? Like, so they'll keep iterating and get better. And you're right? Like once they hit on something that works, maybe it won't work the second time with the same organization, but they can go to bank number 2, they can go to retailer number 4 and ship a new laptop. It is incredible what that scale does. And that's the scale that's scary, right? Like you've just gotten a machine that has no morals, hallucinates, and is able to make up stuff to get to its objective function of taking over an account.
And while so much attention has been paid to full-on voice cloning and identity theft, Vijay says in many cases, criminals only need to approximate a target's voice to have success.
Yeah, so in a lot of situations where we've been called to investigate a supposed voice cloning, we often find it's actually they've just been very, very close to the ethnicity of the person. If the ethnicity of the person is a majority, then it doesn't help. But when the ethnicity of that person is a minority, it absolutely helps, because then what happens is your brain, it's just a voice that sounds very similar to that person, not that person in particular. And the fact is that when you spend all your day listening to a wide variety of voices, and then you hear a particular voice, your ear almost convinces you that that is the voice of your daughter or some closed one. So oftentimes what we find is we find the ethnicity, it's just an ethnicity match. It's not actually that person's voice.
That is fascinating to me. So if my doctor is Indian and speaks with an Indian accent, and if I get a call with a voice that sounds male and Indian, I'll probably believe it's my doctor.
Absolutely. And you see this, right? Like sometimes you just have a bias, right? You sound similar.
So how do companies begin to attack the real human problem? How does Vijay and others determine if someone is alive or a machine?
That category is called liveness detection. So what you're trying to detect is there a live human on the other end or not? And what you're trying to do is you're trying to look at anomalies in the audio when it is generated by a machine as opposed to a human. And I'll give you two examples. There's something called frequency-based anomalies as well as there is temporal anomalies. A frequency-based anomaly is what's known as a fricative. So when you say the word S and F, you're essentially channeling noise into what is known as the S phoneme and the F phoneme. So San Francisco, the S and F sounds very similar to sh. And essentially, you've been able to do that because over 10,000 years of human speech, you've developed an overbite because you've created soft fruits. And so you're actually able to do these things. And what we find is a lot of these generative AI systems don't represent the fricatives really well. These, especially in the high frequency spaces, they don't represent them well. So you're able to see these things very often. More importantly, you have temporal characteristics. So, for example, when I say hello, my mouth is wide open. And then when I say Paul, my mouth shuts down. Because I'm human, there's only a certain speed with which I can do it. And then my vocal cords, my vocal tract, my nose all have to be in certain shapes as it goes over time. And I can only do that at certain speed because I'm human. A lot of these machines don't care about that. And the reason this is important is in audio, you have actually something very powerful. In even calls, you have 8,000 samples of your voice every second. So imagine your voice changing 8,000 times a second, and the machine has to faithfully represent that. You as a human do it naturally, but a machine has to remember all of that. And what we found is machines do a terrible job of doing that often every second. And they don't even need to do that because what they find is in order to fool the human ear, they don't need to care about everything. They take making approximations of the human voice, especially when those approximations make sure your ear still believes it's talking to Bob. And we are able to zoom into these regions and we're able to say 8,000 times a second, oh man, it's making these mistakes. And it's making them a few times every second. But over time, if you have 5 seconds, it's made too many mistakes. And the way it's making mistakes is because it's using this AI application as opposed to the other. And so we're not only able to detect it's a deep fake, we're actually able to say the signature of this deep fake belongs to this particular AI application. And therefore, they must have used this voice cloning tool as opposed to anything else.
Forgive me for what's probably almost certainly a bad analogy.
Yeah.
But I'm a musician, there are great electric pianos.
Yeah.
But someone with a good ear can tell that a sampled piano sounds nothing like a baby grand.
Yeah. And, you're talking about music, which, the Zoom call is 16,000 hertz. So there's 16,000 samples of your voice. In music, there's 44,000 hertz. So 44 kilohertz. So there's 44,000 samples of your voice because when you're music, you're doing all kinds of wonderful things with your voice as well as with the instruments. So you're exactly right. When you are able to hear that and imagine taking someone with a golden ear and scaling that up 10,000 times to focus in on the mistakes.
But, of course, deepfake tech will only get better. Those mistakes will become more rare, so liveness detection will also have to get better, and, well, you see the problem.
But the point is there's a lot of great, good AI, to beat this bad AI.
So we're just in an arms race between
We
these.
are,
Yeah, wow.
but this arms race, you have to go back to security fundamentals. As long as you can create detection technologies that are cheaper than the generation technologies, that's all. It boils down to that fundamental problem. If you can create a detection technology that's either at par or an order of magnitude cheaper than the generation technology, you'll win the battle.
So, software can detect a few unnatural things in a few seconds of audio, but humans often aren't good at that. So, what are we supposed to do in the meantime?
Yeah, I think the first is to breathe, right? Breathe. Whenever someone's asking you for money or making the situation really urgent, breathe and check to see, can you call that phone number back, right? Call them back, potentially, I know a lot of families who, based on these cloning systems, have started using safe words within their families to be able to say, hey, if you're in an emergency situation, we were talking about pineapples at the beginning of this conversation, use the word pineapple and I'll know it's you, right? I know this might sound biased, but I'm going to put a plug for it. Ask for liveness detection, right? Ask your carriers to check, to help you with this problem of is this a deep fake or not, right? Ask your carriers, ask your handset manufacturers, because I think that's part of the equation. You have to get technology. It doesn't have to be pin drop. It can be anything, because I would pay, like I used to pay for caller ID. I would pay $3 to $5 for my grandparents or for my parents if they were able to know that a particular call was deepfaked or not, if there was technology that their carrier and their handset manufacturer offered them. So I'd say a combination of self-awareness, education, and technology. The voice cloning technology is they're typing something and then the voice cloning technology creates a sentence that sounds like your daughter. They don't have infinite number of sentences. So getting your daughter to say more things that are ad hoc, right? Like that immediately, those systems, what you'll find is we've seen call center agents, when they ask a question out of the ordinary, the fraudster actually has to type the sentence and you can hear the typing in the background. You hear
Interesting.
this, really awkward pause between the question and the person. That's also going to go away, and you're going to have voice conversion capabilities. But at least right now, in a lot of these situations, we've seen they use either canned audio, or when they're generating audio, it takes time and it's got these pregnant pauses. And so you can hear the typing and the pregnant pauses.
So when we give out advice saying things like, well, there might be an awkward pregnant pause, well,
Yes.
that's only temporary advice. It's not going to work in the
That is
future.
temporary advice. And that's why I think you have good AI tech to beat this bad AI tech, because these generative AI technologies are increasing in their sophistication at such a rapid pace that you need other technology to keep pace with it. And your human ears or any of this advice is only going to last one cycle.
Fascinating. Yeah, that makes good sense to me. It does strike me that today, the most important thing is to put the idea in people's heads that when they get a phone call, it might not be real.
Absolutely. It could be your daughter, it could be your son, it could be your loved one. Always realize that in this day and age, it is super simple to replicate someone's voice. And so you need to be careful. You need to be aware.
Amanda is more aware now than she ever thought she would be about high-tech crimes. Is there anything that you've changed about your life because of this?
I'm even more secluded now. Just being in the Army and dealing with the trauma that I've dealt with from that, I'm not a very outgoing person. And now even more so, I'm very pulled back and very reclusive. And it's affected me. And in turn, it's affected my family.
When you think about whatever it was that made them able to sound like your daughter and know where your daughter was, does that make you afraid about the future at all?
Absolutely. It makes the trauma, it makes it so that it won't go away. I can't really rest fully. I can't really get over the trauma of the situation happening because it still feels ongoing, because they had access to some information that only me and my family knew. And who's to say that they're not still gathering that information? Who's to say they don't still have that means to get that information about my family and our whereabouts and our habits and our routine.
Yeah. And so, they won't try this precise thing with you again, but who knows what they might come up with, right?
Yeah. And that's the biggest fear from that moment until now, is what else is going to happen now? Because now I know that it's possible. Now I know this thing exists. So is it going to happen again? Is something else going to happen? Like, it's always like, oh, that would never happen to me, until it happens to you. And then it's just trauma.
Someone listening to this right now, what is it you want them to learn from your story?
I think that the biggest thing to take away from this is that there are people out there that they would do anything just to get your money. And a lot of the information that they get from you is off the internet. And I'm very particular about sharing my kids on the internet. I don't tend to do that, but they have access to everything that you put on there, everything. And it's just, you have to be conscious of what you're putting out there and what information that you have readily available to these strangers that are willing to violate you for money. And it's so important to know, like, every time you share your kids on the internet, or every time you share yourself on the internet, you could be a target. And it's horrible. When it happens, it's traumatizing. Do
you think there's anything that any government or company or should do in order to make this harder on criminals?
Absolutely. I'm not sure what they could do, just because, like, I don't know how they got my information. I don't know how they were so believable and how they got my daughter's voice. So I just feel like them knowing how they do that is like the most important thing, because then we could start to understand how to protect ourselves from that happening to us. But it's just, sorry, it's really, really emotional to, like, go through all this again.
For The Perfect Scam, I'm Bob Sullivan. If you have been targeted by a scam or fraud, you are not alone. Call the AARP Fraud Watch Network helpline at 877-908-3360. Their trained fraud specialists can provide you with free support and guidance on what to do next. Our email address at The Perfect Scam is theperfectscampodcast@aarp.org, and we want to hear from you. If you've been the victim of a scam, or you know someone who has, and you'd like us to tell their story, write to us. That address again is theperfectscampodcast@aarp.org. Thank you to our team of Scam Busters: Associate Producer Annalie Embry, Researcher Becky Dodson, Executive Producer Julie Getz, and our audio engineer and sound designer Julio Gonzalez. Be sure to find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. For AARP's The Perfect Scam, I'm Bob Sullivan.